Fair use. Fair use. Well. Fair use. All right. What's going on, folks? Fair use. Welcome to another episode of a Valued Conversation, Gen X Spoken Word. Let's go ahead and get in our zone. All right. What is going on, folks? So this was not a planned show. So if no one shows up for it, that's all right, because we know I have got hours that I have got to get in. So replay gang, if you happen to be catching this, by all means, make comments as need be, okay? All right, so sometime tonight, we may or may not be joined by that spirited individual, Schlitz St. Liquor, AKA the Crispa, known as Robert Platinum. So hopefully Schlitz will make an appearance tonight. If not, he'll catch up with comments as most people do. All right, so what is it that I'm looking at talking about? The show for tonight. Again, this was a last minute thing, but I saw too many things once again going down. Had to put some words on it. American systemic discrimination upheld by gaslighting and fact evasion. The premise that we're still operating off of here, folks, is folks saying that America is not a racist country. Now, for some of you who've been watching and tuning in here, this is going to be a bit of a repeat per se. But I'm adding a few more slides to this so we can go ahead and hash this out a little bit further. America has always been a racist country. The thing here is that the folks who are responsible for the racism that we see being emitted are trying to convince us that we can't believe what we see. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? We are clearly looking at racist ideology going forward, emanating from the point of leadership that the country has always focused on from the beginning since 1776. From inside the White House, the lies of this is not a racist country comes directly to us. Literally ignored by anyone who's part of the administration. If anything, there's always some type of excuse that is being made to more or less substantiate or to double down on a position. Any of us who has grown up after the civil rights movement, clearly we know what racism is, we know what it looks like, we know what it sounds like. And regardless of what is tried by the later generations, our late generation Ys and our generation Zs by thinking that, excuse me, the word nigga is a term of endearment, it is not. It has never been. It is a term of disparagement. And attempting to make it into something that shows love and caring and unity, absolutely not. Or at least not on this platform. The standards that I uphold here are for a reason. And that is, I want this platform, when seen down the road, 5 months, 5 weeks, 5 years, or whatnot, I want folks to know that there was a level of decorum, standards that were maintained and kept that can still be referred back to in the event that information has gotten all banged up. Just today, I noticed there were a couple of websites imitating MS Now, which was a break off of the old MSNBC, but artificial intelligence was being used to mimic two of the well-known anchors, Lawrence O'Donnell, Rachel Maddow, and it sounded close. It was off. Something was off about what I was hearing here, but to listen to that and hear something that is off, but it still looks like it might be okay, something slid by me just about. There was still something about Lawrence O'Donnell saying, smash that like button and subscribe. That's something that he never does at all in his interviews. And luckily enough, I got Rob back me up, who had to look at it and say, hey, John, this seems like it might be AI. I went back, took a second look, put on my glasses so I could get a closer look at what I was looking at. And sure enough, looking at the individual that's presented in front of me, it was AI. Same thing with Rachel Maddow, but it was a lot easier to tell because they couldn't get the face right and they couldn't really match her voice. So again, here is this gaslighting, getting us to believe what we see is actually authentic, telling us what we are seeing is actually authentic. Not the case. But if you don't put any pressure on anyone to tell the truth, what type of truth, or should I say facts? If you don't put any pressure to get the facts, what type of facts will you be presented with? What type of evidence will there be? Dare I say none. All right, so let's do this for a moment. I want to go ahead and put my man Roots Maneuver on the background here. Let's go ahead and step into this. So as I said, even though I may not have anybody here right now, that's not really a showstopper here, only because of the fact that hours have got to get done. So we are now at an official count of 572 hours down. So the goal is 3,000 hours in order to get monetized. So by all means, if you see this, pass it around to friends, pass it around to family. I'm going to also make sure that I get these clips done so we can have a little bit more circulating so people are not waiting for a full show. As you know, I'm horrible about time stamping. So if I can't get my time stamping done in a reasonable amount of time, then just be sure to look for any short clips. All right. So for anybody who had tuned in previously, about a show or two ago, you probably heard Rob and I talking about wanting to make sure we put all the racist content that happens to be out and about up front so people hear it and know about it in the very beginning. That way, if anyone shows up and says, hey, I've looked and I just really can't see any racism to do with Charlie Kirk or any of this nonsense, you can always go back to the beginning of the show and watch for yourself. So that's what we are going to do here. So I am going to make sure that in the very beginning here, we play any information that we have illustrating the racism that we're dealing with that people pretend that does not exist. So if there's any question about it, go back to the front. You can see it for yourself. All right, so I don't have my normal spotters here to let me know if the audio is coming out all right. So we'll just have to play this by ear. Audio should be good, but if it's not, my apologies. Let me know and we'll work it out. Otherwise, fair use, fair use.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like force busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
So I'm sure everybody heard that. In the beginning, we said nigger, 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 but you can't say that because that hurts you. So of course they've got to move to different statements to make. Busing rights, or excuse me, busing, states' rights. What else? Welfare queens. There's always some type of shaded language, or dare I say, coded language that's put out here in order to appeal to the racism of the voters that the Republican Party was looking for. And again, that's all based on the Southern strategy. So I've put this out here numerous times out here before. It's not one of the slides that I've got with me right now. But again, we've all heard of the Southern strategy, but you'll find people still believe that, oh no, the Southern strategy was not real. It didn't exist. Yes, it did. If you go out to Wikipedia and type in Southern strategy, it explains the whole appeal of it and the idea of it, which was to attract the white segregationist Southerner in order to get them to still vote for the interests that the newly formed Republican Party after 1965, when we had the party switch of ideologies, was campaigning on. Racism, segregation, inequality, the same things that you see right now go right back to 1965. after the passing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act and the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So moving on, let's go ahead and move away from this one. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to limit the background music here for a minute so I can share the entire screen. Or, now how can I keep this hung quiet? You know what, how about if I just do this? I'll just open everything up in tabs. That way we can have some background music, but the sound should not carry over. All right, there we go. I like to have my dull hum there. Yeah, that's what we're doing. We don't need to have any sound on either. So the whole point here is to pretty much illustrate that America has always been a racist country. But the folks who are not talking about the racism that the country has shown are the folks who have been profiting from this. Now, don't in any way, shape, or form think to yourself that, oh, everything has been equal since the beginning. And it's just the fact that you people, notice I say this, that you people are never good about getting out and doing things on your own. You guys just don't pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. You guys are just lazy. And of course, here's the shirt here I have. Stereotyped as lazy ever since we stopped working for free. Facts. Marcus, what's going on, man? Shout out. So I'm assuming that you're going to give a quick shout out and be on your way in the next 2 or 3 minutes. If not, feel free to sit back unless there's something else going on, because you know me, man. I don't do drama over here. I've just got facts, values, and standards if anybody's willing to check it out. But thanks for dropping by, man. Stay around for a little while if you can. So, as I said, stereotyped as lazy until we stopped working for free. Every time when we started to do our own thing and put everything together to put us in a better position to be in America, what generally happens? All right, salute to you, young brother. We don't do drama. What generally happens? You have that town being overrun with white supremacists carrying shotguns, at least a minimum of 300 or so, shooting and killing any of the occupants who are black, even those who may be fleeing, and then stealing their property, aka their land, to which many never get back. And when I say many never get back, I'm talking about the descendants of these people killed in the black massacres. Yep, they destroy it, buy off or up. Hey, you know how I do, Marcus. I don't have anything but facts to present to folks who come over here. Facts don't choose sides, but people do. Now, the key thing here, as I said before, America has always been a racist country, but you will hear some of our, I call them some of the skin folks, not our kin folks, who are part of what I'll say is the blackface brigade. Yeah, I said that, the blackface brigade, who will sit here and spout the same type of lies you will hear from our white segregationist congressmen or even content creators. Damn near line by line say the same damn thing, but it's all the same, but just in blackface. So let's go ahead and get started with this, shall we? There you go, Marcus. Boom. So I'm just being straight and to the point about this, folks. There's no need to piss around with this. Was the 1870 Naturalization Act racist? Yes. The Naturalization Act of 1870 was explicitly racist because while it extended naturalization rights to aliens and Africans, aliens of African nativity, and to persons of African descent, it simultaneously denied these rights to other non-white groups, particularly Asians, solidifying racial distinction in United States citizenship law after the Civil War. Here, let me do something, Mark. Let me go ahead and turn on the contents and make sure Act 24. It's to make sure I haven't lost anything. I've got one of my tabs that's missing, so just give me a second. Let me bring something back up. Nothing I hate worse than making sure that I have not dropped something. Oh, the tap dancers. So when we're talking about the tap dancers, as I said before, we've got the Blackface Brigade. These are the blacks who will sit up here and champion everything about what's being torn down about their own culture. Think about this. And I'm talking about some of the folks who wear the red hat that share my complexion, the same as they share Marx's complexion. Holla at me and let me know if you're picking up what I'm putting down. There we go. All right, so this is actually, well, we'll have this come back in a second. So we'll stay with the Naturalization Act for right now, this one here. So basically what we're seeing here is that in the 1870 Naturalization Act, what they were doing was extending rights to the formerly enslaved people who are now free to go about their business. But as you know, after the Civil War ended, where do you go? Who will you work for? How are you going to earn a living? So it's 1865, of course, when the Civil War ends. From 1866 to 1877, we have the Reconstruction period. That's where integration is supposed to happen to allow formerly enslaved people to integrate into Southern society. Let's see. All right, okay. Hopefully everyone can see the comments from Marcus here. I've turned on show comments on stage, so it should be showing hopefully in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen here. Again, Marcus, appreciate you for stepping in tonight. I don't know where Rob is, but he should make it. If not, by all means, please keep dropping some notes here. So the idea here, hey, appreciate it. The idea here is to make sure that there's still a workforce, because there's not a lot of whites who are going to go out and do the work in the fields as the African Americans were doing. Not going to happen. So therefore, they extended naturalization or citizenship to the Africans, but they still denied that of Asians or anyone else who was non-white. Now, I'd meant to present the other tab first, which was the Naturalization Act of 1790, but we'll step back in a second and we'll preview that. But this is supposed to build off of each other. So I've got the first two swapped around, but nonetheless, stay with me. So what are we talking about with the racial differentiation? It created two tiers for naturalization. White persons and people of African descent could naturalize, while all other non-white groups, especially Asians, were barred. See, this is what I've just mentioned. The idea here is that we want to make sure that we allow in just the folks who are going to be of use to us. Anyone else who may be over here that might lower our wages, take our jobs, take our women or whatever like that, we're going to keep them to the outs. Agent Smith, what's going on, man? I'm presuming that it's Saturday, therefore you working the graveyard shift, right? Good to have you in as always, man. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. I put it out earlier that the show was going to be tonight, although it was last minute. Rob and I had talked about it. So I've got to take a look and see what's happening as far as if the alerts aren't being out here as fast as they should be. But nonetheless, you made it in, man. So you're good. We are just literally at the top of the show. So right now it's just you and Marcus hanging out. So we'll just go from there. No, I have not, Marcus. I'm not familiar with that individual. If you get a second, do what you do, man. Educate me from the chat so I can get a good idea about this individual. So getting back to what we're discussing, this law directly paved the way for later more explicit anti-Asian laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, like codifying racial barriers to citizenship. So we're going to be looking at that tab here in just a moment as well. So as I'm saying, the purpose of tonight right now is to lay it from start to finish, brick by brick, demonstrating the racism that has always existed in the United States, but is played down by the folks who benefit from it the most. The act also excluded Native Americans from path to citizenship, further marginalizing them. Think about this. You're in your own country, your own land. Someone comes, takes it over, and then says that you cannot be a citizen, therefore making you a permanent alien / resident of your own country. Now, this in and of itself is diabolical. This is the same technique that has been utilized across 4 different continents. 4. But ideally, when brought to the mat and you make the statement, you are a racist, you know who gets called racist? The person who is actually being victimized. And as I said before, if anyone who's being victimized makes the statement of poor treatment, unjust treatment, stop crying. Pick yourself up by your boots. Why can't you people ever do something for yourselves? Because again, once we do something for ourselves, it normally ends up as a black town massacre. And even then, you will not hear it discussed if it's been able to be suppressed, like the Slocum massacre. Man, I have got to get back on these shows about black massacres, because we've got massive amounts, over 25 in total, that you don't hear discussed. 2 or 3 known by folks: Rosewood, Black Wall Street, I've mentioned Slocum, but then what about all the others that never get discussed? And again, systemic racism was at the basis of these massacres. All right, passed shortly after the 14th Amendment, it served to narrow the broad language of racial equality and citizenship. Noticing, bring you your tired, bring you your weary, or if we remember the Ellis Island statement, that was, matter of fact, that was changed back in, I want to say it was 2017 or 2018, where the Republicans changed the entry that everyone saw coming into the country at Ellis Island. Even that language has been changed. Passed shortly after the 14th Amendment, it served to narrow the broad language of racial equality and citizenship, restricting it to black people, who are the workers, aka the subjects, and whites, while excluding others. In essence, the Act of 1870, while seemingly progressive for including black individuals, which was not the case, they needed folks to do the work in the fields, was deeply discriminatory by actively excluding large segments of non-white population from citizenship, making it a cornerstone of a racist U.S. immigration policy. Holla if you hear what I'm talking about. Believe it or not, Marcus, I send out numerous invites and I rarely get anything back. Now, I made this statement the other day when I was doing the MLK show that at times an individual has to stand alone, if it's merely for the purpose of discovering what danger is out there first, or if he puts his word out that, hey, I'm looking for support, who wants to stand with me, and they show up, then the individual goes on for himself. Not everyone is going to have the level of freedom to jump and move like I do as a single guy in my mid-50s. Not to mention, you also have folks who may have plans already in place. But if I let folks know ahead of time, 2 or 3 days, 4 days, a week, and I still don't get any backup, I just let it go. Everyone's got their reason. Now, as far again as trying to get a panel together, I try constantly. But the thing here is, just a moment. Stop this. I'm an IT guy and I'm sitting in my lab and I've got my phones and everything over here, so they have to excuse that. But as I was saying, it's hard to get folks who will be a part of what you're trying to do if it's not this men are the leaders, what's her body count, say you unto the Lord, fall under his leadership. Now, I am not putting that type of stuff together. What about the lady with the afro? Yeah, she's got some her own things that she's dealing with right now. That's Alicia Hunting Wisdom. So Alicia will make it in if she has the opportunity to do so. Otherwise, if she doesn't, she doesn't. Yeah, everybody's got their something. So all I can do is put the word out and say, folks, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make sure that as time goes by, there's going to be a place that anyone can come back and reference information that you don't hear in our mainstream social media waters. And that's primarily because of the fact that this has nothing to do with this red pill ideology that has polluted the streets. What's up, Joe? Now, as I've said before about the red pill ideology, it has, as I said, completely polluted the streets, and not a lot of folks realize that it is co-opted ideology. The red pill that most people know it to be, whereas a harsh reality and aloof and easy life or truth, if you take the blue pill, a lot of folks don't realize that red pill was originally, before it was co-opted by misogynists, by chauvinists, by incels, by far-right extremists, it was transgender ideology. And the red pill was actually something called preference. I can't remember the name of the red pill that was utilized when a person was transitioning. The character of Neo was in full feud trying to decide what to do about his sexuality. That's what the red pill concept really was. But back in the mid 90s or late 1990s, the Warshawski brothers, who were responsible for bringing the Matrix, obviously were not comfortable letting people know about how they felt about themselves, knowing that they felt they were in the wrong bodies and want to transition. So they said nothing, and the narrative got co-opted by the manosphere. And as I've said before, the original manosphere, which was white, is nothing more than conservative white male victimhood that was picked up by our black manosphere, which of course now is conservative white male victimhood in blackface. And I stand on that. But these are some things that Robert Platinum and I have mentioned in shows long ago that these guys have no concept about. But again, I'm getting sideways, but we'll get back to that. But the thing here is that the manosphere aspect of systemic discrimination has also been folded up and put in place as well. That is also one of the things that works against us, or should I say everybody. Oh yeah, if you've heard of that, but notice, I listen to folks like Red Pill Ranger, who you and I both know of, and it's hysterical to me that he has no concept of what red pill truly is. I haven't really said too much about it over the last couple of years since I came into the spaces. But now that I realize that I'm surrounded by a lot of conservative ideology, and a lot of that caters to what we're talking about, I'm at the point now, well, if you are comfortable enough to say that we as white people don't have to apologize, then I shouldn't have any problem being unapologetically black with facts. Oh, it was a separate show, Marcus. We already did that. Matter of fact, what I'll probably do is do a rebroadcast. You know, it's a recorded show, so I'll put it out here sometime next week. So if you missed it, I may put a link in here tonight if people just want to see it right now instead of waiting for that. But yes, the whole concept of red pill was co-opted, and what you hear right now is not what red pill was. Red pill was originally transgender ideology. I'll leave it right there. Marinate on it. Take a look at it yourselves if you decide that you want to break away from the show here and see for yourselves. All right, so going into our next topic here, I want to step back here because, like I said, I missed this by mistake. There we go. So let's go ahead and holler at this. This is the 1790 Naturalization Act. Again, straight into it. Was the 1790 Naturalization Act racist? Yes. The 1790 Naturalization Act was explicitly racist, as it limited U.S. citizenship through naturalization to free white persons, deliberately excluding enslaved black people, free black people, Native Americans, and immigrants of Asian or other non-white descent, establishing a foundational racial restriction in American law that lasted for decades. This act codified racial hierarchy, making white immigrants eligible for political rights while denying them to others, revealing the early American government's view of the nation as a white country. Put a 1 in the chat if you recognize that America has always been a racist country from the beginning. Put a 2 in the chat if you think America has never been racist. So that is good for anyone who's watching right now or even the replay game. I'll come back and check the comments. But I want to make sure that people understand what I'm reading here is nothing about the black racist guys people want to cast me as being, making statements or pulling something out of my ass. So we are literally looking at the laws that were created in the country from the beginning, outlining the racism that has always been here. But now, even after the even after the civil rights, even after affirmative action, we see all that being eroded again because people are not taking the time to vote to make sure that these laws stay relevant, which is why we're slowly sliding backwards right now. But if anyone is ever wondering what it was like in the beginning, it has always been a racist country. All right, so let's take a look at the key aspects. The core clause stated that only any alien being a free white person could become a naturalized citizen, setting a clear racial boundary. This effectively barred black people, enslaved or free, and indigenous peoples from citizenship, denying them fundamental political and economic rights. The law incentivized immigration from Europe, fostering a predominantly white demographic for the new nation. This racial restriction remained a feature of U.S. law until 1952, influencing immigration policy and the concept of American identity for over 160 years. In essence, the Naturalization Act of 1790 was a landmark piece of legislation that built racial discrimination into the very foundation of U.S. citizenship law, a policy consistent with the era's racial ideologies. I'm going to go ahead and say that again, because I'm sure once my racist watchers show up, they're going to want to challenge and say, oh, that's a lie. This is all a lie. Well, it can't be a lie if it's actually law that was passed. Again, facts don't choose sides. People do. In essence, the Naturalization Act of 1790 was a landmark piece of legislation that built racial discrimination into the very foundation of U.S. citizenship, law, and policy, consistent with the era's racial ideologies. Hey, that's all I've got to say about that. Now, as many shows have I visited in the past, but I've limited my appearances on live shows only because of the fact I'm realizing that the standards that I hold for myself are not the same that I see here. Not that I'm putting any shots on certain content creators, but what I see that is being discussed and how it's being discussed does not sit well with how I want myself to be seen. I want to ensure that if anything does go sideways in history, or if it does not, but still we need clarification on what our history in America was as African Americans based on what's been told to us as opposed to what actually is. I want people to know that I took the correct stance. I made sure there's a level of decorum that is maintained. There's no bitches, niggas, hoes, whatever you want to talk that goes on this platform. There will be no lowering of my standards so I can allow someone else's lesser standards to be broadcast about on my platform. Absolutely not. I will put out a standard that everyone can meet. And it's not going to be hard. It's the simple thing of show some decorum. That's all. Nigga is not a word or a term of endearment. Therefore, I will not bat it around, nor will anyone on my panel bat it around. If I go to your show and that's how you conduct yourself, okay, that's how you conduct yourself. I'm not there to correct you on your platform. Now, whereas I may say a little or may say nothing at all, or just say enough before I have to get out, I'll do that. But again, everyone has a standard for their platform, and that standard is mine. So we shall keep on moving on here. So the next thing that we will discuss, yes, the Chinese Exclusion Act. So this is getting tiring with tabs. So instead, I'm just going to go ahead. Let's see this, screen 3. We'll do an entire screen. There we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep the volume off here. So we'll just keep the same screen up the entire time. All right, folks. All right. Was the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act an act of racism? Surprise, right? Yes, the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was an act of explicit racism and discrimination. It was the first significant federal law in U.S. history to ban a specific group of people from entering the country based on their race, nationality, and class. The act and the subsequent extensions, which remained in effect until 1943, were driven by deeply rooted prejudices, intense anti-Chinese sentiment on the West Coast, and economic fears. So the concept where this first came to be in 1882, remember, we're talking about the railway being built. We're still 1687, yeah. So we are now dealing with the period after Reconstruction, to the point where, as the Civil War, had anyone not taken a look around themselves, they never would have noticed that the Civil War had even been fought. Even though the previously enslaved African Americans were free in some areas, there was the issue of still being menaced, of being maimed, of being murdered, of being lynched. And a lot of this had to do with the Ku Klux Klan, or you just had a lot of folks who couldn't be slave catchers, could now just be black harassers. And the law did nothing to prevent this. But at the same time, you also had Asian Americans who were enduring the same type of prejudice as well, as we're reading about right now. The act specifically targeted Chinese laborers, portraying them as unassimilable race and a threat to the purity of the white race. Where have we heard this before? The legislation was a response, to pressure from labor unions and politicians who used racist caricatures depicting Chinese people as diseased, invaders, and subhuman. The law not only banned new immigration, but also barred Chinese residents already in the U.S. from becoming naturalized citizens and severely restricted their ability to re-enter after traveling. The passage of this law coincided with widespread violence against Chinese residents, including riots, lynchings, and the forced expulsion of communities. So make no mistake here, this is America being what it has always been. America has always had this sentiment. But for whatever reason, the gaslighting, as I mentioned before, and the fact evasion, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes, has always been allowed to persist. But the reason why it has been able to persist is because if you spoke out against it, you could find yourself swinging from a tree, holes in your back, and swinging from the tree, or one of the things that was pretty much most heinous, hanging from a tree, holes in your back, and set on fire. Now, I've tried to show pictures like this before, but obviously YouTube has pretty much struck me for that. So if I need to, I'll find a way to present this information if I got to blur it out more so. But I need folks to understand that we do not live in a country that has looked to be a source of equality for everyone. There were moments and slivers here and there, but no, there was never the intent for anything to be completely equal to everyone. Moving right along. In 2012, the U.S. Senate passed a resolution expressing regret for the passage of these discriminatory laws, acknowledging them as a stain on American history. But if we look at where we are right now, anything that is not, let's say, part of the now defunct 1776 Commission, which was patriotic history, then it's considered racist and divisive, to include even revisionist. While often argued on the basis of economic competition, which is preventing cheap labor from undercutting white workers, the legislation was primarily motivated by racial prejudice against Asian immigrants. So, as I said before, there has never been a time in America where any law has not been centered around racism. But until we actually take in stock of what we're looking at, we will always be nose wide open for the gaslighting. All right, we're still moving. Was the Immigration Act of 1924, also known as the Johnson-Reed Act, racist? Shocker. Yes, the Immigration Act of 1924, also known as the Johnson-Reed Act, is widely considered to be a racist piece of legislation by historians and legal scholars. It was designed to preserve the idealized racial type of the United States, specifically Northern and Western European, by restricting immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe and completely banning immigration from Asia. Now, if anyone watched one of the clips I put together, I highlighted this particular act in particular because Charlie Kirk tried to play his typical game of distortion with the facts. I believe I'm paraphrasing right now, but it was a statement he made along the lines of, for 40 years, America dropped its foreign-born percentage down to 0 or some nonsense like that. But what he didn't say is that he was referencing the Immigration Act of 1924, which, of course, for 40 years discriminated against everyone who was non-white. So as a result, in the United States, of course, Charles is going to make this statement: we dropped our foreign-born percentage by X percent, and our nation was great. Or this type of bullshit. But the one thing I thought about that Charlie forgot is that history overlaps. You have activities that overlapped. So we're talking about America being great here, but for whatever reason, Charlie forgot about the collapse of Wall Street. This was the first thing that Charlie forgot while trying to play up this aspect of, oh, we dropped our foreign-born percentage to almost 0. America was great. Basically trying to say that we didn't have any foreigners in here and life was good. Everybody prospered. No, they did not prosper because you had, again, the fall of Wall Street. I can't remember if that was 1928 or 1929. That was the first thing where Americans lost their money. And now we have abject poverty, people losing their homes. But hey, we dropped our foreign-born percentage, right? The second thing that Charlie Kirk did not consider was the Great Depression. So while he's over here hooting and hollering, telling lies, which he was doing, he was lying, all right? If I can make a side move here for a second. Charlie Kirk was a racially agitating, racist, sexist, egotistical, lying, hypocritical bigot, aka a lying ass, who frequently trafficked in Southern strategy-styled hate speech dressed up as legitimate political discord, which was nothing more than conservative theater and disingenuous debate. Period. Now, I noticed that no one really caught some of the lies or the distortions that he was using. I did, and I did an entire show on it. I've rerun the show twice now. I published it maybe about 2 or 3 months ago. Maybe I'll run it again just in case people seem to still be missing the narrative. But again, as I was saying, while Charlie Kirk tried to say that the foreign-born percentage was dropped for 40 years, he forgot that a good portion of those 40 years were spent with America in absolute depression and gloom, aka the Dust Bowl. Anybody remember that? I think John It was either John Carpenter or John Steinbeck, but I'm thinking The Grapes of Wrath. I get those Johns mixed up. But nonetheless, Charlie Kirk was lying. And he also did a very poor job of telling his lie. All right. That was a distortion. So the Immigration Act of 1924 was always about racism and ensuring that non-whites were not coming to America. Let's get back to it. Proponents use rhetoric about preventing a stream of alien blood from poisoning the nation. And that's just picking up from where we started off. The law established a quota system based on the 1890 census rather than the more recent 1910 or 1920 census. This specifically limited the influx of Jews, Italians, and Slavs who were considered by many at the time to be degraded races. But no one thinks that America has been racist. The act implemented a total ban on immigration from Asian countries by declaring all people ineligible for citizenship, a legal euphemism for Asian immigrants to be barred from entry. This specifically ended immigration from Japan, violating a previous agreement. And I believe there was something called the Gentleman's Agreement, and I kick myself for not having that with me right now, but if I need to, we'll catch up on that a little bit later. The act restricted immigration from Africa, further reinforcing a racial hierarchy. This law was so overtly discriminatory that its national origins quota system was finally repealed in 1965. So act like you don't know if you want here, but if I've got anybody who wants to play the game of racism with me, damn it, I'm the person to have the conversation with. Let's keep floating. Was the Monroe Doctrine racist? I believe folks have jokingly started calling it the Donroe Doctrine. Pay attention. Based on historical analysis, the Monroe Doctrine is widely viewed by historians as having underlying racist and imperialist motivations, often functioning as an instrument of white supremacy to justify U.S. hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. While framed as a policy to protect Latin American independence from European colonialism, it effectively facilitated the subjugation of Latin American nations and the exploitation of their populations. It sounds like we're returning to the scene of the crime. Everything going on in Venezuela right now, folks. Does anyone not realize that if we were to look at this from the perspective of any other country conducting themselves the way we have, such as launching attacks against a sovereign nation's shipping in international waters, not alone here, let's not forget kidnapping sovereign leaders of sovereign countries, that would be considered an act of terrorism. Any and other places around the world to discuss that. But because it's the US, it's not viewed as such. Rest assured, I've got something here that actually speaks to that. Matter of fact, since I brought it up, just give me a moment. Did I have something for that? What the states of Michigan, the concepts. Spouse was about here. Here we go. Let's just take a quick side street here for a second, if we could, all right? Since we're talking about Latin America and supposedly America's for Americans, take a look at this. Without rationalizing, bear with me. All right. So you can't see it here because this is, again, another save tab that I took here and made sure to save just in case this information gets changed later. Without rationalizing, if any other nation had attacked another country's sovereign shipping to include kidnap their sovereign leaders, would it be considered an act of war? So, of course, you can't see all that here. But here's the response I got back. Based on international law, such actions by another nation would generally be considered illegal seizures and potential acts of war. The seizure of a foreign vessel, particularly a state-owned vessel or one flying a foreign flag on the high seas without the consent of the flag state, is considered a violation of international law. Such actions are often described by other nations as outright piracy and violations of the UN Convention of the Law of the Seas. Unilateral attacks and seizures of sovereign vessels by another nation, lacking UN Security Council authorization, are considered to violate the principle of non-intervention and the sovereign equality of states. Such acts can be construed as a use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of another state. Warships and state-owned vessels, including sometimes by extension vessels of a nation, are typically protected by sovereign immunity, and their seizure is generally prohibited under international law. While the United States has argued its actions are justified to enforce sanctions and combat illegal activity, such actions are often contested by other nations as unlawful, unilateral, and a violation of sovereignty. Make no mistakes, folks. The Americas, or should I say America as we are operating under a criminal pirate flag right now. But as I said before, here's the gaslighting. Oh, we're just trying to make sure that we keep our country safe from illegal drug use. But yet you don't go after the people who are in the country making drugs. It's always been about the oil, which we know. Let's just go ahead and say that right now. So coming back to, as I was putting it out here, excuse me, key aspects and highlighting in the racialized nature of the doctrine include: the doctrine and its subsequent iterations were built on the belief that Latin American peoples needed guidance from the US to attain economic and political success, viewing them as inferior. And that's generally the case here. Anytime you wanted to reduce someone to the minimum of a human being, the first thing you generally talk about is their race. And once you discuss race, what is it that people have to gauge in order to say that a race is inferior? Their intelligence. So there's always been the impression that everyone else around European culture was unintelligent, and it took Europeans to bring intelligence and to bring culture to these savages. The doctrine was used to justify the annexation of half of Mexico's territory and to justify military interventions, such as the Banana Wars, across Central America and the Caribbean. It was often paired with the ideology of manifest destiny, which I was getting ready to mention, but there's a tab I have for that. Which aimed to dispossess indigenous populations and impose Anglo-American control over the continent. Theodore Roosevelt's 1904 expansion of the doctrine established the U.S. as an international police power in the region, which was rooted in his belief in the racial superiority of dominant world races. And of course, who is considered to be the dominant world race? In this instance, we know the European, aka the white race, as is known as in America, aka Caucasian. Now, what many people fail to realize is that on the map of history, world history, Europe did not enter into the fray until around 1000 BCE at the earliest, and maybe as late as around 700 BC. But prior to that, if you were to look in the opposite direction, if we look north, the continent of Africa had history extending back 5000 BC, 8000 BC, going further back. We're talking about at least multiple dynasties that have been recorded throughout history. We have A groups that show the beginning of aspects of societies and how it was formed. Again, all this back in 5000 BCE. We see concepts of spirituality that existed that some Africans would call Christianity before Christianity. that was documented, again, almost 3 to 5,000 years before the concept of the biblical character Jesus Christ ever came into being. But again, when we hear the concept of dominant world races, this is not one of the cultures that was considered to even be in existence until later on down the road. I've covered a show on this before, but if I need to, we'll do another one and we'll get a little bit deeper into the aspect of when certain cultures came to exist in the annals of history. Some analysis argue that the foreign policy of the Monroe Doctrine mirrored the domestic racial hierarchy of Jim Crow. You think? Treating Latin American nations as subordinate. Critics argue that the doctrine was, and in some forms continues to be, an expression of colonialist policies and the infringement upon the rights of Latin Americans. No one should be surprised in this, especially now the concept is, well, this is the hemisphere that we're going to protect. We have control over this hemisphere. No, we don't. Unless we use the threat of war or violence, in which, okay, we got nukes on this side of the hemisphere. So who's it going to be, right? Sad asses. All right, so let's stay on this. As I said before, anyone who's just now joining the show, this show is all about the systemic discrimination that has always been in America's history. Hence the name of the show, American Systemic Discrimination, Upheld by Gaslighting and Fact Evasion. So if this is starting to burn your ear, then so be it. I'm going to burn it all the way off. We are going to look at what is a fact in history that is denied, which is America's racism. Was the concept of white man's burden racist? Shocker. Yes, the concept of the white man's burden, popularized by Rudyard Kipling's poem, is widely considered racist because it framed European colonialism as a moral duty to civilize non-white, non-Western peoples, portraying them as primitive, inferior, and incapable of self-governance, thus justifying imperial exploitation and reinforcing harmful racial hierarchies and stereotypes. It promoted an ethnocentric, paternalistic view where white people had a God-given right or responsibility to dominate and control other cultures, viewing them as childlike dependents. Now, I've got no doubt here, after I finish rolling this off here, folks, when this show is over and done with, I may or may not see multiple accusations again of me being a racist black man. All I'm doing is just telling people about the history of this country. And of course, who is the major perpetrator of the disenfranchisement of this country? Anglo-Americans. And this is not me being a racist. Now, here's a caveat here. Let me go ahead and make this public service announcement, as I have started to do as much as possible and will continue to do. So during the course of conversations that we have here, race will be discussed. Now, I don't want anyone to get this all flipped, or get tripped out about this, but there's a racial component of the conversations that we have here. However, there will never be any racism that will take place. That is something that is not going to be allowed. Whether you're black, whether you're white, Hispanic, we are not doing any form of racism here. But just because I am mentioning something that you find uncomfortable does not mean I'm being racist. It means that this is an uncomfortable truth. And right now, it's the uncomfortable truth that Donald Trump does not want to be heard by anyone, hence why labeling Black history as being divisive is his tool of choice now. He's trying to unwind anything and everything about history that does not cast the slave owners, the slave traders, the white segregationists, the racists as the people that they were. Where's the racism in pointing out the history as it stands? There's nothing here that I'm making up. I am merely outlining what's already there. And again, it's nothing more than an uncomfortable truth. Now, this is something that we as African Americans can identify with when going through grade school. Everybody always knows about that time frame when it got around to discussing slavery, how uncomfortable everything got, because you knew for the next 2 or 3 weeks in school that any of the white kids there who were bigots would be walking around making slave jokes. I can remember one particular time. I was probably a freshman in high school. There was a kid named Paul. Didn't speak to him too much. We knew of each other. I knew that he had some ways about him that I wasn't cool with, but he invited me over to his desk one day. Hey, John, come here for a second. Hey, I want to show you something. So I come over and he holds up a piece of paper, and there's this little stick man with like an afro that he tried to make it out with. And there's a square, and this guy was in the middle of it, and there's a chain around his neck. I said, "What's this?" He said, "Oh, that's you." What do you mean that's you? Yeah, that's a slave picture. Now, because of the fact I wasn't the mentality or had the mentality I had right now, he had a chance to walk away with his teeth. But being that I was a product of my parents, still am. But the thing is that when you see racism and you know it's blatant and they're trying to agitate you, don't give them success. But nowadays, I more or less defer on the side of, I'm not my ancestors. Come get this ass whooped. But again, be that as it may, that is what I recall growing up in the 80s. Yeah, it was always an awkward time frame when it was time to discuss slavery in school. All right, so let's roll back into this. Key aspects of racism. The idea is inherently placed white people at the top of a racial pyramid, possessing superior culture, intellect, and systems. It casts non-white peoples as half devil and half child, needing the guidance and control of white colonizers, ignoring their own rich cultures and systems. And that's generally something that if you listen to the work of Dr. John Heinrichs Clark, Dr. Joseph Ben-Jachin, Chancellor Williams, John Jackson, Sikante Diop, they talk of how the culture of Black, or should I say African American nowadays, has been so diluted, so subjugated, that we forget that we were here before Europe. And we, when I say Africans or Africa as a continent and as a place of knowledge, math, astronomy, science, medicine, all of this was cultivated 2,000 to 3,000 years before anyone in Europe was considered to have lived or live in the cradle of civilization. But because of what's happened over the years, especially once slavery became a practiced institution, that, as I mentioned in the previous show, that was signed off on by the Pope, giving King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain the right to enslave the infidels, meaning anyone who was not considered Christian. And then it was off to the races from there. Take heed that this mentality is still in place. But what's worse is that a lot of African Americans do not realize the prominence that they come from, because we've been taught to believe that anything about Africa is poverty, is about disease, sexual depravity, inferior intellect. And that's what has come to be known. As kids, we got upset if someone called us African booty scratchers. Yeah, that is what we were referred to as children if we wanted to make somebody upset. Even nowadays, I see grown content creators, my shade of brown, right? Or black, talking about, man, look at these Bigfoot Africans. You know, the vast stupidity that I see in them, understanding that their content and the commentary they make is one from an indoctrinized behavior. If your oppressor and enslaver is also the creator of your savior, you have been indoctrinated. I will continue to say this. Excuse me. The concept served as a powerful ideological tool to justify conquest, resource extraction, and the suppression of indigenous peoples as a noble mission. Cultural superiority. It promoted the idea that Western culture, religion, and governance were universally superior, while other traditions were barbaric or savage. While some argued it was about bringing progress, critics pointed out that the burden often translated to economic exploitation, cultural destruction, and violence, all while masking the inherent racism and hypocrisy of colonial rule. Now, as I said before, and when Marcus was here earlier, I don't do a lot of drama here. I don't do anything that's going to be exciting to where you see people going back and forth, arguing and cursing at each other. No, I'm not about to get down like that, because the whole reason why they're sitting on these panels with some of my content or fellow content creators, the whole reason why they're sitting there is because of having been misled by the information that I'm speaking about right now, because of indoctrinating and taking this information in and becoming more or less a concept of what it is that has ruined our culture. I said this the other night. The concept of the mythical individual, Jesus Christ, and slaves. The best way to put this is that before there was any concept of nukes, alphas, kappas, omegas, Baptists, Protestants, Methodists, hell, even what are we missing here? We'll say even Masons. Before any of that came along, we were all African. Once we were dropped off in America, or should I say in America, in Haiti, the Caribbean, Jamaica, you name it, once we were dropped off in our different areas in life, that did not mean that we still did not share the same ancestral DNA, the same beginning. And this goes to that FBA nonsense that I've kicked out here before, of the fact that, oh, they're not like us. We all have our separate experiences. We're not the same. Rob and I had a concept, should I say a conversation about this earlier today. Oh, by all means, as Marcus says, please take the time to like, share, and subscribe. The conversation that we had was me more or less saying to him that regardless of how anyone tries to frame it, just because we ended up in different areas of the globe does not mean that we all share the same beginning in history. Instead of focusing on where blacks, excuse me, I got to correct myself because black is a color. Instead of focusing on where African Americans ended up across the globe. Again, America, Haiti, Jamaica, the Caribbean, South America. Instead of focusing on where we ended up, we need to focus more on where we were taken from. If I were an African and I never left Africa, I would still be considered an African. If I were an African that was taken from Africa, kidnapped, which is the proper term, and brought to America, brought to Haiti, brought to the Caribbean, brought to Jamaica, brought to Brazil, am I still African? Yes, I am. The fact that I may have come up in a different part of the world doesn't mean that I did not experience the same type of discrimination. And that's the aspect that FBA completely misses with this nonsense. That's like me saying, because I was born in Tennessee and let's say Marcus was born in Georgia, we are both African American. We are both in the South. We are both subjected to racism. But because of the fact I'm in Georgia and Tennessee, does that mean that we both have not had the same type of racism? Does that not mean that racism in general has not affected us? Think of it in that same type of expression if we now start to look at African Americans experiencing racism in America, Afro-Americans, Afro-Jamaicans experiencing racism, Afro-Haitians or Afro-Caribbean. They're all experiencing the exact same thing, albeit we're not having the same life experiences, but do we still not share the same burden of racism? Yes. And that's the aspect of unity that we're missing right now. I'll drop that soapbox for a second. Let's get on with it. All right, Manifest Destiny, still rolling through. Was manifest destiny racist? Shocker like everything else. Yes, manifest destiny was fundamentally rooted in racism and white supremacy. Ding, 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 right in the opening line, folks. So I want to make sure that any of my racial provocateurs who show up and accuse me of being a black racist who is a racist black man, understand, go through all of this and read it for yourself. I've got my receipts right here. There's nothing that I need to do except read what's already been done. It was an ideology in the 19th century United States that held that white Americans were divinely ordained to expand across the North American continent. This belief system was used to justify the forced removal, violence, and systemic disenfranchisement of indigenous, Mexican, and other non-white populations. So what are the key aspects of racism we're going to be talking about here? Well, I'll tell you. Proponents believed in the inherent superiority of white Americans and their institutions. This was often used to justify the civilizing missions that sought to replace the indigenous cultures with American ones. But yet we hear this whole nonsense about the Great Replacement theory. Oh, they're trying to bring people into the country to replace us. Let me read this again. This was often used to justify the civilizing missions that sought to replace indigenous cultures with American ones. All right, so to my bigoted brethren, do you really want to have this conversation about people being brought in to replace somebody? This is what your culture brought. And as I said before, this is not racism. This is merely an uncomfortable conversation for some, but it is still grounded in fact. The whole idea of the Great Replacement theory of folks being brought in to replace whites, no. What's being missed here is that whites brought themselves in and replaced the Native Americans who were here. So let's talk about replacement theory, why don't we? Native Americans were frequently portrayed as savages or impediments to progress, which justified their violent removal, at least again to Eurocentric mindset, justified the violent removal. Forced relocation, Trail of Tears, and in some instances, near extermination. The ideology was used to rationalize the expansion into Mexican territories and the subsequent treatment of Mexicans as racially inferior. And we already covered that in the Monroe Doctrine. Well, Monroe Doctrine, but Monroe is a good way to update it. What'd you say? Manifest Destiny was not only about expanding territory, but also about expanding the institution of slavery as Southern proponents sought to spread slave states into new territories. Remember the Alamo? Yeah, that was Mexico said, no, you will not bring slavery down here. But yet in American history, here's that gaslighting again. These guys are portrayed as heroes because they went down fighting for what they believed in, which was the institution of slavery or the attempt to expand it. But when it was nullified, okay, these guys now become martyrs. But I remember as a child when I did not know any better, as I'm reading history in school or watching movies, you know, the Alamo or whatnot, I'm being taught that these guys, individuals who were for slavery, pro-slavery, were heroes. But at the time, I didn't know that. That's why I always found it odd when my father would say, when you get older, son, you'll look at this differently. And he was right. Shout out to you, Pops. Love you. The doctrine coincided with 19th century beliefs in scientific racism and phrenology. And phrenology was this idea that you could put your hands on someone's head and by the shape of their head, you could tell whether or not that they were criminals or not criminals. But it was this type of junk pseudoscience that was relied on to also give everyone the impression that if you were of a certain color that was non-white, you were automatically considered to be racially inferior. While some contemporaries, such as abolitionists and critics of the Mexican-American War, challenged these views, the dominant ideology of westward expansion was closely tied to white supremacist, racist, and xenophobic attitudes. Holla if you hear me. Clearly, You have got to be picking up what I'm putting down at the moment. Again, I don't expect my shows to have a lot of people in them because I'm not here to bring any foolishness. I am here to bring you facts. And once you hear these, you cannot unhear it. America has always been a racist country. We're almost at the end, folks, so bear with me. So here is the concept that the late white nationalist Charlie Kirk was pushing. I want to say not at the beginning, but more towards the middle and end of his life, or at least his public persona, or the image that had been portrayed of him. He was all about the Seven Mountains Mandate, and the whole concept of that is the Seven Mountains would be 7 areas of society to be completely controlled and run by Christians, aka Christian nationalists. Now, recall the show that I did that talked about 30-year trail of violence from the far right, and primarily what was recognized in the reports that were done is that Christian nationalism was always that fire burning at the bottom that sparked everything else. Yes, the time out, let me back up. Is Seven Mountains Mandate Christian nationalist ideology? Yes, the Seven Mountains Mandate is considered a key framework and strategy of Christian nationalist ideology. Christian nationalism is violence, by the way. Christianity has always been a violent religion, and it has just been normalized over the course of a millennium. Because of the fact that it's been normalized, no one is looking sideways at the beginnings of it, how people were killed in the name of God. I can't remember if it was in Acts, was it Numbers, where there was the decree from the Lord to kill them all, men, children, women, even the dogs. Now, of course, as I've told you guys before, no one in the Bible ever existed. All right. It is Aesop's fairy tales for Christians. And if I have any subscribers who have any issue with that, I have no issue with you unsubscribing. But as I said before, you cannot unhear what I've told you. So if you go back later and take a look at this, I don't want to listen to John. He's lying. I know my God is real. No, your God is not real. We did a whole show that debunked any concept about this. But still, as I'll say, let me get back on track here, because this is not meant to be an attack on any one of the Christian faith, although there is nothing there. But still, you'll get there. Maybe you will, because religion is the last aspect of slavery that is responsible for the discontinuity that exists amongst folks of the world. More on that later. Excuse me. Let's do this again. Yes, the Seven Mountains Mandate is considered a key framework and strategy of Christian nationalist ideology. It is a dominionist movement that calls for Christians to take dominion or gain control, as I said, over 7 pillars of society to align them with a conservative, often charismatic Pentecostal interpretation of biblical law. So basically what it's saying here is that anyone who believes in Jesus and the Lord and the Lord, excuse me, what the hell is that all about? Anyone who believes in that will inherit and control the earth and everything under that through the dominion of these 7 areas. The movement focuses on influencing 7 spheres. Education, which we've seen that the current administration has been cutting off any type of funding and telling them that if you teach DEI or CRT, we will cut your funds permanently. And you will need to let us know when you stop teaching this, and we will give you your money, AKA we will give you back the money that we never should have taken. Government. So we've got Donald Trump saying that Christians are being persecuted, right? Absolutely not. That is a damn lie. When you stop and look at who has been responsible for, let's say, the bombings in the mid 80s, we're talking about the clinic bombings, Planned Parenthood, even the kidnapping and murder of clinic personnel. Let's also look at the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition. what are I talking? The Salem witch trials. We'll look at the transatlantic slave trade. We'll look at the Barbary Coast slave trade. We'll look at the near extermination of Jewish folks in Europe. Again, the transatlantic slave trade, I think we mentioned that, to include also King Leopold in Africa. I mean, severing people's arms off because they didn't meet a quota. Let's look at the actions of Christopher Columbus and the near decimation of the Taino Indians in the Caribbean, to include also the rape and murder that was conducted by his crew. And then, of course, we get to the Native Americans, the near decimation of their population, and being relegated to what, just a junk existence, a poor existence in their own country. 4 continents, all right? Death, deceit, and destruction across 4 continents is what the Eurocentric way of life has brought and come and settled. But if anyone makes a statement about racism being systemic in America, it's a lie. You're not doing enough. But if you do enough, then of course now you've got white segregationists coming into your town, burning it down, killing all the occupants, taking what is theirs, taking their property. Or if it's not that type of demise, then the city will probably be sunk and underwater, as a lot of black cities have gone by the wayside due to that. America has always been a racist country. All right, getting back on track. Education, government, media. We saw that. We see the news here. Prager, no, I don't want to say Prager. Yeah, PragerU. They are a university, again, part of education, that is creating distorted versions of history, or we'll call it patriotic history. That's what they want to try and use here. History that shows America in a good light, meaning that we don't want to look at the bad parts. We don't want to acknowledge the slavery that was subjugated, or that African Americans were subjugated to. We don't want to acknowledge the racism that was shown and portrayed, or should I say executed, against Asians. We don't want to look at the conduct that we put forth towards the Native Americans. Oh no, we want to look at that. We don't want anyone to pay attention to how we treated the Mexicans. Oh no, we can't have any of that. That does not put us in a good light. American systemic discrimination upheld by gaslighting and fact evasion. That's the name of the show, folks, and that's what we are discussing. Business, family, religion, arts and entertainment, all those areas. Take a moment to look at this and now think about what you've seen in just this year alone, where the 7 Mountains Mandate is shown to be adhered to and is being followed. Again, education, government, media, business, such as law firms that are finding themselves being extorted by the Trump administration. Therefore, the Trump administration getting themselves $200 million or more of free legal advice. Family, religion, arts and entertainment. Go back and think about what has transpired over the last year, and then think about the 7 Mountains Mandate. Matter of fact, we'll probably need to have a show on this. Yes, we will. And we will dedicate it strictly to that. And I will give you specific instances of the 7 spheres, that Christian nationalists say need to be controlled by Christianity. The goal is to install Christian values into these pillars to transform culture and, in some interpretations, usher in the second coming of Jesus. So here's something that you guys may or may not know. There won't be any second coming of Jesus, because Jesus never existed. There will be no rapture, and Jesus is not coming back because the individual never existed. Jesus, or the concept of the biblical character of Jesus, was nothing more than a manner of control that is still used today. in order to keep the masses in line. Especially when I listen to African Americans talk about, oh, don't take my Jesus. Oh, don't take my Jesus. I've said this plenty of times, and I am 10 toes down on this. I wouldn't say it if I couldn't substantiate it, right? Outside of the Bible, per empirical evidence, where in recorded history has a man ever walked on water? He didn't. It never has happened. But in the biblical, historicity, oh yes, it has happened. Inside the pages, as I said, of Aesop's fairy tales for Christians. Inside of these pages, you will get all these amazing stories. And there's nothing wrong with the story, folks. I'll say that right now. Everyone likes a story of inspiration. We talk about David and Goliath, which is also one you can look at of perseverance. We like to hear stories of immense trial and tragedy. Here's a story. I think I've spoken about this in the book of Daniel, where they talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into a furnace 7 times hotter, or at least, well, let's say at least 4 times hotter than the normal furnace. So we're talking about at least 4,000 degrees, 4 or 5 times hotter, however you want to put it. Even the guards who threw these guys into the furnace perished because of the heat. But yet these 3 individuals are able to walk around and walk out, not be singed, not smell like smoke, and are even given higher offices. How outrageous is this? But there are people who actually believe this happened, right? So then the thought process came to be of, well, wait a minute. How is it that these 3 men are able to walk into this oven and not be singed at all? But yet, stay with me now, God's chosen people, all right, we're talking about the Jews, God's chosen people are put in the ovens by a madman. You know who this guy was? I'll say his name, Hitler. 6 million people murdered. All right, this did happen, but 6 million people murdered. But for whatever reason, if they were God's chosen people, why did they not survive the same way that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego survived? Right? Again, these are his chosen folks. Why would these three men be spared, but yet 6 million of his chosen people perished? Now that, as I said before, is where you see the inconsistency in the Bible. But don't let me be the person to tell this to you, because of course, if I say this, I'm being racist. No, I'm merely pointing out again what has been written. As I said before, no one in the Bible existed. But when you give people these stories like this right here, that should already tell you that this did not happen. But then if it didn't happen, why are we relying on allegory, myth, folklore? Why would we rely on this to read a book? Why does it take all that to read a book to get someone's interest, when the majority of these stories were pulled from other cultures? Because as I said before, the concept of Christianity, the concept or the knowledge of Europe was not known until around 1000 BC and maybe as late as 700 BC. But the knowledge of Africa and its works, its contents, preceded Christianity, preceded the concept that we're told here by at least 2,000 years or more. But I digress. Let's get back into this. It is frequently linked to the new apostolic Reformation and is described as a strategy to turn the United States into a nation governed by a specific conservative Christian worldview. Proponents include Lance Walnu and Bill Johnson, with significant support from figures like Paula White. Remember Paula White? Oh, angels from Africa, angels from Africa. It's funny enough, Donald Trump said Africa was a shithole country. So if Africa was a shithole country, excuse me, why would you be looking for angels from Africa to come help you win an election? Oh, shizzle. Are you kidding me? Angel for Africa. Angel for Africa. How many you missed the bus? We missed the bus. When's the next? All that nonsense that she was running around, blah, 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 talking about. Angels from Africa are coming. Angels from Africa. Yeah, right. Again, if I called Africa a shithole country, and if angels were real, and I saw her saying that angels from Africa are coming to rescue the president, if I were an angel, I'd have my wing up and a middle finger. Damn if I will. But again, not real, nothing to be concerned about. Again, significant support from figures like Paula White and Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA. Oh yeah, Turning Point was caught up in this nonsense as well. As I said, Charlie Kirk was the key person pushing the idea of the 7 Mountains Mandate, who he in fact introduced Donald Trump to this. Check out that Wikipedia page I told you about. Now, Wikipedia is able to have folks log in and add information to it. So I don't look at that as being a solid source. But the thing about it is that it's not actually a false area for information either. Anything that you're not sure about, as I've told you in some of my earlier shows where I showed you how to go about mining out information, do a correlational search. Gauge what you see on one page and see how many other places are speaking the same thing. Therefore, you can determine the authenticity of what it is that you're reading. Excuse me. The ideology has been prominently associated with support for Donald Trump, with proponents viewing him as a leader who understands the need for Christianizing these 7 spheres. I don't know why it says spheres. Spheres. It is seen as a thought-provoking framework for shaping policies in schools and local government, often bypassing traditional democratic processes in favor of a top-down approach to power. So when Charlie Kirk was assassinated a few months ago, all of a sudden you had membership going through the roof, not to mention schools around the country saying that we want to be a Turning Point charter school. How do we become involved in this? And the whole aspect of it was pushed through the racism that Charlie Kirk was telling folks. But folks were pretty much believing that I don't see any racism in what he's saying. Of course you don't. If you grew up inside that culture where black folks and subhuman, of course you didn't think of it as being racism. It was par for the course. It is natural. It is expected. That's one of the main things in my doctoral studies that I'm focusing on, far-right extremism in education. It is here now, folks, and we need to pay close attention to what is happening when our children, or let me remove myself here because, as you know, I never had children, or at least children who lived. Your children are subject to this nonsense right here, to this extremist Christian values, or should I say this Christian nationalist distortion. Be on the lookout for this. As I said, there's going to be more shows where I'm going to start slowly focusing on what's happening inside of the education system based upon these ideologies, these racist ideologies that I'm currently identifying. Don't worry, folks, we're going to talk about it. The movement often uses spiritual warfare rhetoric, describing the effort to take over these sectors as a holy war or a fight against demonic control, according to the analyses of the movement. Demonic, folks, there are no demons. And if we were to equate anything to demons, it would be the ideology of this Christian nationalism that we're reading right now. While some supporters may view their actions as positive cultural influence, critics argue that the 7 Mountain Mandate is a form of theocratic ideology that threatens democratic institutions and religious pluralism. I can say no more about that. That is a fact that is being put down, right? Let me know if you're picking down, or excuse me, picking up what I'm putting down. There should be no one with any doubts about where we are in America as far as racism is concerned. For an hour and 39 minutes, I have given you ample facts of the racism that exists in America that is systemic. I have got no gaslighting for you folks. I've got nothing but facts and the receipts that I'm sharing with everyone right now, whether you're the two people out here watching or the folks in the replay game. Make sure you share this. Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what's going on right here. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for. There's my shameless plug. Let's keep on moving. Notice how we are not hearing anything else from Project 25 at the moment. You want to know why? Because Project 2025 proved to be, give my language because you know I don't get down like this on the platform, but it has proved to be absolute dog shit. Bill Maher just made a statement to, I think, Johnson or someone's on his platform sometime this week. I can't remember if it was Johnson or Kennedy, but he said that you guys, meaning the Republicans, are going to have the absolute dog shit kicked out of you because of what you have done since January 2025 of last year. And he is absolutely right, unless Trump finds a way to prevent any elections from occurring. Does Project 2025 share ideology with Manifest Destiny? Yes. Political analysts, historians, and critics increasingly describe Project 2025 and the broader MAGA movement as a modern 21st century iteration of Manifest Destiny. Now, you remember, folks, Manifest Destiny was inherently racist. While the 19th century doctrine focused on westward territorial expansion, analysts argue that the current movement repurposes this ideology into a digital age framework of spiritual and cultural conquest, aimed at reshaping American society based on white supremacist and Christian nationalist ideals. I say again, framework of spiritual and cultural conquest aimed at reshaping American society based on white supremacist and Christian nationalist ideals. Have that conversation about Project 2025 and you hear all the gaslighting about, oh, we're just trying to make America more efficient. No, we're just trying to make sure that people who belong here are actually here and those who break the law are removed. But the folks breaking the law are the ones who are responsible for enforcing the law. What are we trying to do here? Talk about enforcing the law, and we've got 1,500 folks who are cut loose who attacked the Capitol. We've got a president who was guilty up to his ass in convictions. And the only reason that he managed to get away is because, as we saw, starting with the first impeachment, the second impeachment, going into the classified records scandal, we saw that the Republican Party was willing to use legal precedents to keep Donald Trump's criminality from facing accountability. What are we doing? Really? Key ideological overlaps and modern adaptations include: both frameworks rely on the belief that the United States is a vessel of divine will ordained to lead, dominate, and expand. Project 2025 frames its goals as restoring a Christian society, viewing this as a sacred purpose. Now, you didn't hear that during the course of the election campaign. And of course, Russell Vogt, I want to say he says his name Vogt, although it's spelled V-O-I-G-H-T, but Russell Vogt, who is also on the Heritage Committee, or excuse me, the Heritage Foundation. He's on the committee of the Heritage Foundation, who also traffics in this type of ideology, clearly stated that Donald Trump knew everything about Project 25, but he was just playing coy for the media. Everything that Trump said he did not know about Project 2025, damn near has been executed down to 99.99% of it. Trump always knew what this was. But then again, who actually takes him at his word except the people who are accustomed to him lying, because that's who they believe. They believe a lying ass liar, the same as they did Charlie Kirk's lies. The opposing culture, I think I mentioned this, right? Yes. Excuse me. Let's go ahead and move on. I think I talked about exceptionalism and divine mission and expansionism reimagined. I think we did discuss that. Let's move on. Critics argue that Project 2025's focus on crushing dissent, eliminating diversity initiatives, and overturning reproductive rights is an attempt to colonize American culture, similar to how Manifest Destiny aimed to displace indigenous people. The ideology is mirrored in a MAGA Manifest Destiny foreign policy that rejects traditional alliances in favor of a transactional approach, emphasizing raw national interest over international norms. Look at how Donald Trump has been increasingly attacking our NATO allies, to the point our NATO allies are preparing to protect Greenland and defend it from their American ally. The hell is going on here? But yet, as I make these statements, I'm the racist. If you are to look at any of the captions or comments that are going to come once the show is posted, I'm going to be seen as the guy who's being racist as I tell these uncomfortable truths, which are facts. The America First agenda, including interest in acquiring territories like Greenland, is seen as echoing the Monroe, aka Donroe doctrine, and the expansionist jingoist elements of 19th century Manifest Destiny. Executive actions aligned with Project 2025 have aimed to rewrite American history to reflect this exceptionalist narrative, this patriotic history, such as initiatives to remove discussions of systemic racism and promote patriotic education. Goddamn. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, drop a 1 in the column replay game. Make sure you do this. While the 19th century version was geographically focused, the 2025 version is domesticated, turning the focus of conquest inward, aimed at transforming federal institutions, reducing the rights of marginalized groups, and consolidating power. I am not wrong in my statements. Or let me back it up. I am not incorrect in what I am stating. For 1 hour and 47 minutes, I am providing facts. I've got evidence. Here is the proof that I speak of. Anyone thinking differently is probably one of these gaslighting and fact-evading individuals that I'm talking about. All right, so we come to the last slide of the show, and this is what I've saved here. Based on the evidence of the Immigration Act of 1924, the Naturalization Act, you can't see this, but I know what I put down here. Or actually, okay, this one wasn't saved. Okay, great. Based on the evidence of the Immigration Act of 1924, Naturalization Acts of 1790 and 1870, is it accurate to state the United States has operated as a racist country? Based on the evidence of the Naturalization Acts of 1790 and 1870 and the Immigration Act of 1924, it is highly accurate to state that the United States operated with structural legal racism, particularly regarding citizenship and immigration policy. These laws were designed to create a white nation by legally defining who could belong, favoring Northern Western Europeans, and excluding or restricting people of color, specifically Asian and African individuals. Although, remember, all know the 1870 Naturalization Act gave Africans American citizenship, but of course, because they still needed workers in the South. Here's an analysis based on the evidence. Naturalization Act of 1790, establishing a white republic. The first Congress limited naturalization to any alien being a free white person. This legally restricted, this legally restricted the acquisition of U.S. citizenship to white immigrants only, extending enslaved people, free black people, Native Americans, and Asian immigrants. This act established a racialized definition of American belonging, setting the precedent that the U.S. was designed to be a white country. I can't make up what's already been written as fact. All I can do is read it back to you folks. Naturalization Act of 1870, selective inclusivity. Following the Civil War, this act extended naturalization rights to aliens of African nativity and to persons of African descent. While expanding rights to some, it deliberately maintained the exclusion of other non-white groups, particularly Asian Americans. This law reinforced a racial hierarchy, which was further solidified by the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Immigration Act of 1924, aka also the Johnson-Reed Act, institutionalizing eugenics. This act implements a national origins quota system that favored Northwestern Europe and severely limited Southern and Eastern Europe. It also banned immigrants ineligible for citizenship. Because 1790 and subsequent laws made Asian immigrants ineligible for citizenship, the 1924 Act effectively prohibited almost all immigration from Asia. Known as the Asian Exclusion Act. Now, let's not forget about the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, but this is what they're referring to now as the 1924 Act. Obviously, it had many different names. Known as the Asian Exclusion Act, it was intended to protect a white demographic, with proponents explicitly citing the need to restrict undesirable racial strains. Now, let's keep in mind now, if we go back and look at Manifest Destiny, you saw, as well as I did, for those of you who've been with me this entire time or replay game, take note, when you hear white nationalists and far-right extremists talk about, oh, they're trying to replace white people. They're trying to more or less get rid of us and bring people in to replace us. What do you think happened when ships landed on Plymouth Rock or the Eastern Seaboard? What do you think happened? Do you not realize that the settlers replaced the group of people that were already here, aka the Native Americans? But yet white nationalists have the audacity to talk about great replacement theory? Are you out of your effing minds? Apparently you are, and you're also bigots. These laws were not random, but part of a systemic 160-year-long effort lasting until 1952, actually 1965, to maintain white supremacy in citizenship. Therefore, the evidence strongly supports the conclusion that U.S. immigration and naturalization laws during this period were fundamentally racist. Goddamn, I'm done. I don't have any more to say on that, folks. I think everyone should have caught what I was saying here. America has always been a racist country and continues to be one, even in the moments that we see occurring right now. And you would be disingenuous at best to act as if you don't see it. And furthermore, yes, Charlie Kirk was a racially agitating, racist, sexist, egotistical, lying, hypocritical bigot, also known as a lying ass liar, who frequently trafficked in Southern strategy-styled hate speech, dressed up as legitimate political discord, which was nothing more than conservative theater and disingenuous debate. And damn if he wasn't even any good at that. I'm going to leave that as my final note. All right, folks. Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what's going on right here. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for. All right, so we saw that the council didn't make it by in force as I expected, but again, people have got things that they need to do. I'm not going to hold it against them. But as I said, sometimes a man needs to stand alone to make it known on what's happening. So again, I thank everyone for showing up who was able to make it. Thanks, Marcus, for coming through. Also, Agent Smith, I appreciate you running through as well. Shout out to you, Joe Cool. Other than that, I see everyone on the next repeat of the show here. Thanks as always. Catch you next time.